this suggests is that the right way to interpret this modal superstructure is to see models as part of a practical interface between an embedded agent and her environment, and to look at the role that models play in guiding action. The same can be said, I believe, about loss, probability, disposition, all of the implicitly and explicitly modalized structures that are at the heart and soul of scientific theorism. The embedded agent sees a world full of possibility and potential. She sees her own contributions to history as undecided, literally undecided, indeterminate until resolved in the course of decision. And the world participates in that undecidedness to the extent that she sees her decisions as interacting dynamically with other variables. She sees a range of possibilities that she might yet actualize, and this idea of a range of possibilities is the origin and ground of all modal thinking. There's nothing deluded about this perspective. Constructing models and tracing out the effects of potential actions is part of the natural history of human beings. Treating one's own actions as free variables in the context of choice is part of the internal logic of decision. How am I doing for time?
It's okay.
I'll skip it to 3 minutes. How much time do I have?
It's okay.
Okay.
The beginning was a little bit messed up.
Okay, so one positive philosophical development coming out of metaphysics in recent years is recognition of the possibility of deflationary realism. That is, an understanding that realism about a class of beliefs, like, for example, modal beliefs, while denying that there's anything in the world to which they correspond from a transcendent perspective, is a stable position, so long as one's account of the role of those beliefs in the life of the embedded agent employs no correspondence-style relations to elements of the mind-independent fabric of the world. So we can be realists about modality, believing that there are facts about what would, might, or could happen under various conditions, without believing that we need possible worlds or non-actual possibilities available from a transcendent perspective as truth makers. The thing about modal beliefs is not only that such things are not needed, but that if one tries to give a correspondence-style semantics for them, one has a hard time saying why beliefs about the kinds of things that they're supposed to refer to, the kinds of things that are supposed to act as truth makers, should play the practical role of modal beliefs. Why should what's going on in possible worlds, other non-actual possible worlds, concrete or ersatz, make any difference to how I act in the here and now? Models serve not simply as images of the world or tools for prediction, but also as practical interfaces with the environment. The modal content of a model has a different fit with the world from its representational content. It isn't made true by something in the mind-independent fabric of reality. It plays a role in making true something that is a part of that fabric, namely how I decide to act. Okay, so what does all of this have to do with free will? Well, I would say that a good part of the appearance of conflict between free will and determinism comes from a sort of hyper-objectification of scientific modalities, either in their causal form or in the form of natural law. This comes out clearly in the form of objection that I cited at the beginning to Dennett's form of compatibilism. The idea behind the objection seems to be that relations of natural necessitation are built into the fabric of reality and revealed to us by physics. And this tendency towards hyper-objectification of physical modality is part of a tendency prevalent both in the philosophical and the scientific community to think that physics presents us with a truly transcendent picture of reality, what Bernard Williams calls an absolute conception of the world, an all-inclusive picture of the world invariant under the broadest possible class of transformation, thoroughly cleansed of perspective, not shaped by human concerns or sensibility, and so on. And you know sort of this line. This idea, it seems to me, takes physics either a little too seriously or perhaps not seriously enough. It dehumanizes physics. It fails to see what a human activity modeling is, and what a thoroughly human idea the category of the possible is. Insofar as it employs modal categories, and it's the heart and soul of physics, the difference between a catalog and a theory, to use Einstein's phrase, to tell us what the modal structure of reality is. Physics doesn't give us a description of the world as it appears from a transcendent perspective. gives us a view as it appears from the perspective of an embedded agent with limited vision and limited capacities for control. The distinction between the possible and the actual is rooted in the first personal perspective in which one is faced with a choice of action. The perspective of the willful agent at the moment of choice is the origin and ground of our ideas of possibility. Models are part of the practical interface between an embedded agent and her environment. In the context of choice, her impending actions are left out of the model as something whose values remain to be decided by the process of choice. She sees a range of possibilities that she might yet actualize, and until the decision is made, each of these possibilities and the futures that follow on them are live. This sort of naturalistic account of representational activity that focuses, I think, on the practical, comes very naturally to philosophers accustomed to viewing the human organism in naturalistic terms and seeing cognition, including the fully developed products of our best science, as a strategy for managing behavior. So it comes naturally to someone like Dennett. It comes naturally to someone looking at cognition from the point of view of philosophy of mind, or as a biological phenomenon. But there's a propensity among a wider circle of philosophers, including philosophers of physics, perhaps especially philosophers of physics, to hyper-objectify physics. The tendency to invest these laws and regularities with the force to undermine personal freedom is part of that tendency. It fails to recognize the immanence of possibility. The distinction between the possible and the actual is a thoroughly human distinction, rooted in the human-centered perspective, and indeed the first personal perspective in which one is faced with a choice of actions. This remark of Ramsey's once came to mind when he said, "My action is the ultimate and the only ultimate contingency." The God that, it's the perspective of the willful agent at the moment of choice that is the origin and ground of all of our ideas about possibility. And I would say that there's nothing more human than the idea of possibility. To a truly transcendent God, and this is the qualification that I mentioned that I would make earlier, there is nothing but the manifold of actual fact, including the real patterns in the manifold, and the embedded, embodied modelers who exploit those patterns in choice. The God that appears more commonly in philosophical discussions, however, is not a truly transcendent figure. It's an anthropomorphized God, conceived in the mold of a human agent, choosing initial conditions of the universe and watching the universe unfold. And it's that kind of metaphor that's used to give content to the distinction between initial conditions and law-like features of the world. It's not an accident that when we talk about the distinction between laws and initial conditions, and hence between what merely is the case and what might have been, we tend to give it content, that